Hello, welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 146, an interview with Adam Workman and Erica Schiller, the president and vice president of Flutistry Boston.
Hello, flute lovers and Flute 360 fans. It's Adam Workman from Flutistry. You might know us from our concert and masterclass live streams, or our famous selfies. And what about our iconic water bottles? Or maybe we've helped you with instrument trials or your repair needs on the road or at our home in Boston. Flutistry helps flutists across the globe sound their best from our home in the flute-making capital of the world. Whether you are looking for a flute, piccolo, alto, or bass at any level, or repair services, sheet music, or accessories, Flutistry is here to support you and your artistic goals. This flute geek with experience in performance, repair, and flute making started Flutistry, literally flute and artistry, because I believe a flute dealer should be the artist advocate with every product or service we provide, especially in the flute search process. Now, 10 years later, we're here talking with Heidi about new tools and ways that Flutistry is supporting flutists like you at every stage of your artistic evolution. Stay tuned for our episode and be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and visit us online at flutistry.com. Stay safe and play on.
Hi, Erica and Adam.
Hi, Heidi.
Hi, Heidi.
Good morning.
Good morning to you, too.
You too.
How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fabulous. I wish it wasn't so gray and mucky here in Fort Worth, but other than that, I'm great.
Oh, up in Boston, it is nice and sunny here.
Oh,
Very cold, but sunny.
I'm jealous. What about you, Adam?
Well, it's the sun is poking out right now. I'm in Austin, of course, right now, and it was quite a shock the other day. I don't know how long ago that was, Heidi. Did you all get snow up there?
We did. It was like a couple Sundays ago.
Yeah, I think we swapped weather with Erica.
Oh, my goodness.
It was a nice surprise for us Texans, huh?
It was. My puppy got to see snow for the first time, so I was grateful for that.
Oh, how sweet. That's amazing. So any plans for this weekend or anything that's new with y'all?
Adam and I work 7 days a week, so
like weekend?
6. I try to only work 6 if I can. But yeah, I think plans are a thing I haven't thought about in, I don't know, many years now.
Yeah. Before the pandemic.
Yeah.
That is true. Oh, shoot. Oh, literally same thing here. I work 6 days a week and I try to take Sunday off, but plans with air quote around it would be just hanging out with my niece and my sister. So I always try to make room and carve room out for that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think sometimes that my name, it's baked into my name, Workman. That's pretty much, it's a blessing and a curse.
But
Yeah, right.
Oh, shoot. Oh, I love that. So we talked about a month ago about this wonderful series, and I'm so glad that we were all on board and on the same page to deliver this content. And I thank you so much for carving out the many hours it took to make this happen. And so I want to say that before we dive into the questions.
Well, it's really our pleasure, Heidi. We've been watching and listening to podcasts for, quite a while now. It's an incredible body of work that you've put out there so far. And it's an honor to have been asked. And finally, it's our honor also to be able to support you and your project. We understand entrepreneurial efforts and you're doing an incredible job. So we're thrilled to be here, both Erica and I.
Oh, that is the sweetest. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Cool. So for those who may not know you guys, can you talk a little bit about your background, how you met, Flutistry, and all of that jazz?
Yeah, I think Erica and I talked about how we were going to go about answering these questions as far as, who goes first and all that stuff. I think, I'll tell you a little bit about my musical background, which is really the first step in the creation of Flutistry, I suppose. So I grew up in Vermont. Of course, Bernie Sanders is very popular these days on social media. And funny story, growing up in Vermont, playing in the Virgin's city band, Bernie Sanders would speak at our Virgin's Day and Memorial Day parades every year. So since I was in the flute section, he'd always sit right next to me while he waited to give his speech to our community every year. So it's really funny to see a meme of Bernie Sanders sitting with his mittens on from Vermont. So a very idyllic, beautiful place. And I was very fortunate to have started the flute because my band director, that's how it is for so many of us, was just so incredible. Her name was Susan O'Daniel. So I started really playing flute seriously in band, middle school. And then my very first teacher was actually a flute maker. His name was Jonathan Landell. And he is actually one of the first flute makers to start selling head joints separately as an upgrade to a flute, as opposed to, buying a whole flute, getting a whole flute. And so he had moved to Vermont. And when I started playing flute, everyone in town was telling me, there's a flute maker in town. There's a flute maker in town. And I'm like, oh, I don't even know what a flute maker is. I suppose they make flutes, but I'm just like barely playing flute in band. So anyway, eventually I got better at the flute and everyone said, you should study. You should contact Jonathan Landell and study with him. And I assumed that he still lived in town. We're talking a town of like 1,500 people in Virgins, Vermont. Anyway, by the time I reached out to him, he had already moved to Richmond, Vermont, which wasn't that far away. It was about 30 or 40 minutes. So he was really my first serious flute teacher. It was an incredible experience because at 14, I would walk into a flute maker shop for every one of my lessons. So he was an incredible player, studied with Papatsakis in Boston, degree from New England Conservatory, principal flute at Tanglewood, just an incredible player, wonderful sound. So I learned my Tafnel and Gobert and all that stuff with, gold shavings and flutes and pieces all around me. And it took many years to learn over time what all those different tools and huge machines and different parts, for a flute maker shop, there was an awful lot of tools and not a lot of flutes. So it was really a special thing to see and to get to know. Anyway, later I ended up getting the great opportunity to study with Louis Moyse, who was living in Montpelier, Vermont. So I was able to study with him for a period of time. In fact, he lived in Westport, New York, and I studied with him there. And then he moved to Montpelier, and I continued to study with him there. And then he was not doing well health-wise after a year or two. And I had a great fortune to study with Court Gettle, who was a professor at Castleton in Vermont. And he was my flute teacher before I went on to Boston University to study performance with Marianne Gadigian. So that was in 1998, and she was the flute teacher at Boston University. And it was an incredible honor to be able to study with her there. And I was one of her first college students. So we have known each other a long time and in lots of different ways. And she's a remarkable musician and such an inspiration. So I got the great fortune to be able to study with her there. And then I would say after about 2 years, she had actually taken a position as acting principal of the Pittsburgh Symphony. And so she wasn't in Boston as much. And she had reduced her studio size so she could do the work in Pittsburgh. And I was very fortunate once again and got to study with Jacques Zone, who was principal flute of the Boston Symphony at that time. He was only principal in Boston from, I want to say, 97 to about 2001, maybe. I don't know the exact years, but right in there. So, of course, I worked as an usher at Symphony Hall, and I get to hear all of the Boston Symphony performances for several years. Jacques Zone playing principal, Marianne Gadigian playing in the section, and, of course, the incredible flute section of the Boston Symphony. Jacques ended up taking a year to play with the Berlin Philharmonic, and so he took a sabbatical, and I took a year off while at Boston University, and I moved out to Los Angeles. Prior to the existence of Colburn, Jim Walker, of course, is the master of so many things, and especially of all great flute things on the West Coast. And Jim offered me to be able to join his studio classes at USC, even though I wasn't formally enrolled. And I lived around the corner from his house with my aunt and uncle in Thousand Oaks, California. And I had a day job where I did customer support on the phone for a car dealership software company. And so I did that. I worked by day. I would practice at night. I would go study at Jim's once or twice a week. And on every Friday night, I would go down to USC and join the studio for their studio classes there. And that was a really incredible experience. After that year, it was determined that Jacques was not coming back to Boston. He was going to stay in Europe, which is great for him and his family. And Linda Toot had joined the faculty at Boston University. And so I was able to go back to Boston University and finish my degree at BU with Linda Toot. And the great thing about when I came back to Boston from LA was that, I grew up in Vermont, very beautiful place, but we were a family and still are a family of very limited means. And so, if it wasn't for the kindness and support of so many wonderful people all the way up through even my scholarship at Boston University, I probably wouldn't have been able to pursue flute seriously. And I think that's that's a theme that kind of we always remember in our work. But basically, because I had to work when I was in LA, I'd gotten accustomed to, okay, this is how you do it. You work and you pay your bills and you pay for your expenses and you work in your flute life and all your flute obligations when you can. So when I came back to Boston, I took my senior year, because of course at this point, right, I had studied with Marianne for 2 years and then Jacques for a year and a half, and then Jim for a year. And I really was looking to have some longer period of time with teachers. So I was so fortunate to be able to take my senior year at Boston University and split it into 2 part-time years. So what I did was I went to classes, I fulfilled my academic classes part-time, but I took full-time lessons and I worked the night shift at a biotech company. And I would get out of work at 7 a.m., go straight to school. My quintet members hated me because I would always ask for rehearsals, by like 9 o'clock in the morning was like my late at night, and it was there too early in the morning. But I did that for 2 years, and I was able to graduate with my degree in flute performance from Boston University, having had an incredible array of amazing teachers and really building those were the beginnings of my corporate and professional work experience, which have, contributed to everything I've done ever since. So that was a really incredible opportunity. After I graduated, I was able to get off the night shift, thank goodness. And I started performing a lot and teaching in Boston. And I worked with a lot of different ensembles and was doing a lot, like getting calls and, getting hired for work. And I was really excited about that. I just played, I think it was Haydn's Creation. I just played principal flute in an ensemble in Newton. And the very next day I went out to grab a sandwich from my favorite deli and I bit into that sandwich and my jaw popped.
Oh.
And there was the beginnings of very serious TMJ for me. And basically, I couldn't play the flute. In fact, I gave my flute to a very dear friend and said, can you hold on to this for me? Because every time I play it, my TMJ gets worse.
Oh.
So it really, that moment changed my path forever. But just to give a little, an overview of all of my flute playing and musical background, things really started to shift at that kind of mid-20s TMJ moment. But all my training and background is all those wonderful teachers. And that's what I take into account every single time. And I can still play the flute, but my goals have changed dramatically. Mm-hmm. And I really think that the TMJ I think of it as so many things in life, but in that moment, I think of it as bumpers in the bowling alley. Mm. It was like the TMJ was just a moment to say, this really isn't your path. Mm. And I really needed, literally something had to stop me from playing or pursuing that performance degree in order to look around and see where I think my real value was. And it took a few more years after that, but here we are now. So that's my background. Erica, what about you?
I feel like you skipped a few things after that, but I'm sure we'll come back to that.
There's an empty spot in there. You're right.
All right. I grew up in Metro Detroit, about 20 minutes from Flute World, Flute Specialists in Muramatsu, America. So I know you heard Rob talking a lot about that. He was my very first repair person. I was just listening to his episode from a couple weeks ago.
That's great.
Yeah, I was very lucky to grow up in a community that was that strong for flute. There's a lot of parts of the country where you just don't get access like that to the community. Obviously in Boston, we get a ton of that, but it's unusual in most parts of the country. So, I was lucky. I used to get to sit on the floor at Flute World and dig through music, and it was great to be a part of that community. And I spent a lot of my summers at Interlochen and then ended up doing my undergrad at Michigan State and my master's at Arizona, spent a little time studying abroad in Vienna. Then when I graduated from my master's, it was the height of the financial crisis. And there was no work to be had anywhere. All the orchestras were folding. It felt a little bit like it feels right now, but, less disease. A little less scary, but definitely just as scary financially. I decided to move out to New England sight unseen and do the starving artist thing. And it turned out for me that I was not good at being a starving artist. It was really, really, I think there are people who are great at it, who really, they can focus on the art and they can focus on their community and they can grow through that and find opportunities. And for me, I just found it very hard to not have money for rent or groceries. So I ended up getting an office job up in Boston where I was an assistant at a software company. It was 3 or 4 years that I was there. And that ended up being really the skills that brought me to flutistry. There were really like 2 sets of skills that brought me into it. As an undergrad, I had worked sort of on the holidays and in the summer for Muramatsu America, really for the little piper side of things. I did a lot of collating of sheet music. I had begged and pleaded Urban Row for a job. And I said I would do anything. And it turned out I really did anything. I mowed the lawn. I watched their grandkids clean up.
You mowed the lawn?
Oh, yeah. Earth had a beautiful backyard before we ended up at the Flute House in Royal Oak. And, but there were a lot of wood chips everywhere. And so it was always a little bit dangerous.
Wow.
But yes, I have not mowed a lawn since. I watch my neighbors do it often and think, I'm glad I'm not doing that. It was an incredible experience to get to see the workings of Muramatsu America and to get to hang out with all the sheet music with the little paper stuff all the time. And so I had that great experience. And sort of in part of doing that was that I got to be the one that would bring instruments to the studio for my friends to try, for my classmates. Mm-hmm. And so when it was time for them to pick an instrument, I would, go driving to Muramatsu and I would get the bag of flutes and bring it to the studio. And then I got to sit in the room and help everyone think through what instrument was the right instrument for them. And so I got to have this experience. And sort of at the same time that was happening, I was in my lessons and I had sort of a weird skill set where I could mimic my teachers really well, but then I couldn't tell how I did it after. I couldn't replicate it later, but I could do a great job of just playing back at them whatever they had done. There was something about the way I heard things that I could just do that very naturally. To my teacher's dismay, and one after the other, they all stopped playing for me, basically. But and so I really learned how to do it. But it ended up being, it just sort of was this combination of this sense in my ear where I could hear things, and the work I was doing, getting to sit in the room for the trials. And then by the time I had made it through school and let go of the starving artist attempts at life, I got a chance to learn a whole new set of skills at the software company I was at, where I was the only assistant for a company of 75 people. I took us through a merger. There was it was a lot of work where I got to learn about human resources and payroll and accounting software and all of the things that now absorb 75% of my day.
Sorry.
And it's all right. It's great. It ended up being that, I think life takes us to the places we're meant to be, and you pick up the skills as you go, and those become the things that propel you into the next thing. And I ended up, this is the part, Adam, where we get to tell our origin story. I think it is.
Well, I think I just want to interject and say that let me interject with what happened after TMJ and getting to the start of Flutistry, because that's where we meet. Mm-hmm. So I think this is, I don't know. And Heidi, please stop me anytime.
This is perfect. I am sitting back, enjoying my espresso, learning so much from y'all. And I have goosebumps over here. I just love every minute of it.
Well, it's actually really, we're actually celebrating 10 years this year as a company. And it's just, this has given us a wonderful opportunity to reflect at a time that we really are thinking so much about our future right now, that to think about where we've come from is it's a gift. So we thank you for that. It's very meaningful to us. And I think, when I was thinking about this, especially because we're a dealer, we do so many things and we're involved in the industry side of things, it is important, where we're not so focused on the playing, even though we're both highly trained flutists and we can definitely play the flute. It's some of these in-between things that are really interesting because I didn't just start Flutistry.
Yeah.
Basically what happened is, just to kind of go back for a minute, the TMJ thing started and I just had to not play the flute. And I decided at some point while I was working still full-time, I think at that point I was working at my first of 3 tours of duty at Biogen IDEC, which is really a wonderful, innovative company, biotech company in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right in Kendall Square. So that was kind of the start of my non-flute professional life, where that was my 40-hour-a-week salary, benefits, job. And I was, trying to play flute at that time. And it was during that period of time where the TMJ happened. So after, maybe 6 months of that job, that's when the TMJ happened and I wasn't able to play flute at that time. And so I thought, there's a very important mentor of mine, and so many. I mean, I could just go on and on from all the ones I've already mentioned to the one I'm about to mention, who is Stephen Finley. I think I met Finley, technically, I think I met him because I was studying with Marianne, and she and Finley are very good friends. And I don't know, she was always talking about Finley, her friend Finley. And then I found out he worked at Powell. And then I ended up looking at Powell flutes at one time. And I worked with him there and got my flute from Powell later in my college career. And then when I was doing this work, I did decide to go to my very first NFA. I had a friend in the Nashville Symphony that I went to BU with. He still plays contrabassoon in the Nashville Symphony. And so 2004, the Nashville Convention, Paula Robeson was the Lifetime Achievement Award, one of the Lifetime Achievement Award winners, I think, that year. And it was my first time going to NFA, and it was such a surreal experience. And I was able to afford it because I had a friend I could stay with. And Finley, unbeknownst to me until I got there, had recently left Powell Flutes and was starting, after 20 years there, and had started his own flute repair company called Flute FX. And it was really just him. So we finally had the chance, without him having to be on the exhibit floor the whole time and him, at work in Boston. Like, that was a great opportunity for us to become fast friends. And we did. And he's still a very dear friend. He's like a brother to me. And so basically I was working during the day at Biogen doing this customer support role. I was trying to fix my TMJ desperately by going to every specialist known to man. And I heard a little bit of Carolyn's story. I didn't realize Carolyn and I have a lot in common, but, to hear her TMJ story, we're going to have a drink over that one probably. But, I was really working on trying to solve that. And at the same time, I was spending more time with Stephen Finley and like what he was doing with his business. And basically he really needed help. And so in the golden days of Flute FX, I was really the person, actually, I was to Finley in many ways what Erica kind of has become in some ways to, I don't know if that's the right comparison, Erica, but you know what I'm saying?
Sorry.
Where like in operations, like I was, Erica's job is much bigger and takes on a lot more responsibility, but really, I didn't really work on the flutes as much as I play tested the flutes, gave feedback, helped do, A/B testing back and forth between instruments. I learned some things there, of course, but I also, designed his logo and built his website and helped him get hooked up with an accountant and all of that stuff. And through that work, I started to have some fulfillment where I couldn't play. I thought, well, if I can't play, I at least want to support people who are doing things that are contributing to the flute community. And I'm going to do my part. And that was at that time kind of helping Finley run Flute FX. So I did that for a few years, actually, while I had these various corporate jobs. But because of that work, I reconnected with Marianne Gadidian after a couple of years of just, being out of touch after graduating and all that stuff. And she had some projects she was doing. So I helped build her publishing company with her husband, Charles Villarubia, an incredible tubist. If any of you don't know, oh my goodness, absolutely amazing. They had a company called Azad Musico, which was a music publishing company for some of their, they were putting out CDs and arrangements of some of their music. So I helped build their website and I helped do the graphics for their recording projects and their CDs and their website. And any promotional things that needed to be done, I was a big part of. Through that, I then had Paula Robeson heard that I was working with Finley at Flute FX. And of course, had known Paula a long time. And I was so excited. This is before Facebook and everything, really, that was happening. I was so excited. She had sent out these mailers that she was doing a recital of all Bach sonatas at Jordan Hall.
Mm.
And I was like over the moon because, I mean, to hear Paula Robeson perform live is an experience. It's amazing. And so I was super excited. And she sent one of these mailers to Finley at Flute FX. And I was going through his mail and I opened it. And wouldn't you know, right there, handwritten on the note is, I hope you can join me. And I really would like to talk with Adam. So I see this note and then I go to the recital and of course the concert. And it's just, you know, for me, I'm just totally fangirling. I'm in love with everything that's happening. And afterwards, you know, we have some congratulations to her and hugs and talking. And she said, you know, I really need some help with some projects. So I was like, yeah, what do you need? Like, this is the perfect thing. Like, I want to help. I'm not really playing much right now because I'm trying to recover from this pain. What do you need? And so I helped her with basically I built 2 websites for her. I still, in many ways, I think Erica Flutistry is involved still with her PR projects. We manage all of her inventory of books and CDs. We have them all at Flutistry and we send them out to other dealers when they order things. I'm the one that signed her up for Facebook and YouTube. All the YouTube videos, the flutings with Paula, were just me and Paula and a video camera that we bought with her Fly Miles together. And, you know, we did, I think, 32 episodes of that. And just, you know, a really artistically fulfilling time that took me away from feeling like I was failing at playing flute and really showed me that there are ways to support artists and creative people that I hadn't really made room for before. And it was a really special experience. By the way, all that work for Finley and Marianne and Paula, and I eventually joined the board of the Papatsakis competition in Boston. That was all extra stuff on top of my 9-to-5 type of work. So anyway, I just want to say this, that like, this is a perfect example of what Erica was saying. You know, you just say yes if it feels right, unless you just can't do it or you know you shouldn't be doing it for whatever reason. And that's basically what I did. I did my 9-to-5 and I took my vacation time and every ounce of flexibility I could get from work to do flute related things for the people and projects that I cared about. So in that time professionally, I was working at Biogen, and then as happens at biotech companies and, you know, where there's a lot of research and development, one of the drugs that we were working on, you know, had to get pulled from the market for some more research, and they had a lot of layoffs and I was one of them. And I had the opportunity to work at Dana-Farber Harvard Cancer Center. I worked for 2 offices there. I was split 50-50. I worked for the Office of Communications, which communicated among the 7 major cancer research institutions in Boston. And then the other half of my time was for the Initiative to Eliminate Cancer Disparities. And that was mostly for, you know, underserved communities and diverse communities whereby there was a tenuous relationship with medical research. And that was a very important project and very important to bring, you know, and we're seeing it even now where, you know, different communities have different access to healthcare and different information. And so part of my time was dedicated to that program there. So I learned a lot there. Then I ended up getting rehired at Biogen, and I was there now working in another department, this time human resources. All of this is going on while I'm doing this work for these other artists behind the scenes or after hours, you know. It's all relevant because I was really learning the skills, you know, that I would need later to really understand how, you know, professional companies with big budgets, you know, operate. We don't see a lot of big budgets in the flute community, ours included, but we do want to be professional, you know? And so I think there's a lot of skills that I learned there. But I decided after a few years of doing that and working up with all of these projects with these other artists through my work with Finley and Flute FX, he had actually been hired on as a consultant at the Haynes Flute Company. And so I was kind of running the administrative stuff for Flute FX. Well, he was, quite frankly, most of his time was spent at Haynes. And then eventually Haynes saw some of the work I had been doing for Flute FX and for Marianne and for Paula and for the Papatsakis competition, and they offered me a job.
Wow.
Finley ended up going full-time at Haynes as the vice president. I think his official title was and might still be vice president of artistic direction. And I was consulting for quite some time, and I was part of that team, the initial team that was basically Stephen Finley, Zoo, who's the famous, well-known head joint maker, who had spent a long time at Powell and also at Haynes. And Sandra Ragusa was there working for the Eastman Company. And myself, we were like the kind of core 4 people in what eventually evolved into be known as the Renaissance at Haynes. So, the new mechanisms, the new scales, the new head joint styles, the new crowns, the new materials, the new, like everything, that was all stuff that I was a part of, and a very small part of, but I did get to understand from the, I really learned from the flute maker's point of view. When you do this, this happens to the flute, right? So it just rounded out all of my kind of repair and technical background with now understanding more from the maker's side. And I'm really proud still to this day of some of the work that we did there. And then they offered me a full-time job. Huh. So I took that job as director of Amadeus and classic flutes. And my responsibility at that time was to bring those kind of, let's say, student step-up level flutes, intermediate flutes, and the kind of entry professional level flutes, and bring them in line more closely with what was going on with the custom level flutes. And of course, I knew what was going on with the custom level flutes. So it was a great opportunity. And basically, I spent the next year and a half completely renovating the way those instruments were produced and the quality and the design features and some head joint decisions that were made. During that time, Avon O'Leary joined the company. So I worked with Avon as well. And then Joy Roberts joined. And something very important, and I think this is really where I'm headed with all this, something really important happened to me at that time. There were a lot of changes going on at Haynes. And the funny thing is, I had worked at Haynes when it was in downtown Boston. That's when I started at Haynes. But then 2-3 months into that job full-time, that full-time position, the owner of Haynes, which had recently been purchased by Eastman Strings, and Chen, as the owner of Eastman, had decided, we're going to move Haynes out of downtown Boston. And, it's much more affordable from a real estate perspective. And a lot of the makers in Boston, some of them were in downtown Boston. In fact, Powell was right across the street from New England Conservatory. When some of the regulations in the city of Boston changed, some of the environmental and health regulations changed over time, there are some elements of manufacturing flutes that are no longer permitted within city limits. And so there was a clause where if you currently use these techniques and supplies and chemicals and things in city limits, you can keep doing so. But once you leave, you can't come back and do it, right? So it was a monumental decision for Haynes to leave downtown Boston because once they left, they were not going to be able to come back. And that kind of is part of the story of Boston for people that, I basically lived in Boston for 21 years. Yeah. And for people that haven't been to Boston or don't know, it's a great city. It's an important city. It's an innovative city. It's a historical city, but it's also a very small city. And because of the historical value, there's not a lot of sprawl, which makes the property values really, really high, and a very expensive city to live in, and also an expensive city to have a business in. So it made all the sense for Haynes to move out. And in fact, I think they made a great decision in their new place, which I was part of designing. I had an office there and everything for a while. Is wonderful. It's a great experience there. But what was a 15-minute, 10-minute train ride or half-hour walk for me turned into an hour and a half commute each way and having to get a car. And a lot of changes were happening for me where at the same time as I was discovering something key, which is really where flutistry came from. And that is that here I am in my late 20s working at one of the world's great flute making companies thinking this is going to be my career for the rest of my life. This is my dream job. I've had all these corporate jobs, which have been, rewarding in some ways, but not necessarily fulfilling. And I'm so happy to merge those things together. But something happened in my experience at Haynes. And quite frankly, it would have been the same at any of the makers in Boston. And that is that, we expect the makers to make flutes that are of their concept of sound and feel, and they make them in whatever price points they decide to make them in, right? But at the end of the day, when you're working with an artist or a young artist or a beginner flutist, not every flute works for every flutist. And so if you're limited by budget or you're limited by material choices or even head joint cuts, you can try all day long and many flute makers do with great effort, but sometimes you just have to say, we don't have a product that really matches you and your goals and your playing style. And I just found the more I got involved with that part of the industry, and again, this is not all on Haynes, this is just my experience overall, I really felt strongly that I didn't like the fact that I couldn't help some of my friends. I had spent, all these years helping people that I believed in. And then when it came to instruments, it wasn't for lack of quality or even lack of choices at Haynes. It was the very reason that Haynes and other great flute makers in Boston and around the world are successful is because they have very specific things. And sometimes those very specific things are actually the same reasons why they don't work for other flutists. And so I had to recognize that and realize that I really wasn't fulfilled doing that because I wanted to do everything I could do to help. So I left Haynes and I went back to Biogen IDEC for my third round, another position, this time in research and development, while I did some, all that extracurricular work still. But I really got to this point where I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the end of the road for flute for me. And I'm sharing this because I know a lot of your listeners have probably felt that, or they will feel it maybe someday. And I think it's a very natural thing, and it's something that should be embraced. I wrapped up one of my longest running students, 7 years I had taught him. He was going off to college, and I gave him one of my prized flute cases as a gift. I gave away a bunch of sheet music. I moved everything flute related out of my apartment and said, I'm going to give this corporate thing a try and just commit to that. I thought I was going to work in the flute making industry, and I'm not going to be happy there no matter which flute maker I could be working at. And I literally said, I quit the flute, and I had a really big cry about it. And my life partner at that time, my fiance, Jason Amos, who's a marvelous violist, and we'll talk about him again, I think, but we're no longer together. We're great friends, and he's still a part of our family, if you will. But he was very gracious in letting me, have this time where I was letting go of the flute and going into corporate. Meanwhile, he had graduated from NEC and was having a similar experience on viola, saying, I don't want to play, you can't pay me $35,000 to move to Oklahoma and play viola in an orchestra, because of course, string players have so much great repertoire. It's very different, than wind players. And that wasn't an insult. It was him making a decision, right? He decided, I want to make music with a master's degree from New England Conservatory and a marvelous musician. I want to make music, the music I want to make that's fulfilling for me, and I can earn my income another way. And he got his real estate license. So while I was at Biogen, I had coincidentally, even though I'd had a lot of repair and technical experience and work at the makers, I was like, I need to just do these official repair trainings so that those are checked off the list. So I know those things. So I did the Landell courses. I did the Straubinger stuff. I did the Mermotz. So I was getting that kind of, and it's a lot of stuff that I was, of course, already familiar with, but it was just nice to have that, because people, when they want to start working with you, they want to know that if they don't know your work, they want to know you're at least authorized to do the work, right? So I was doing that. And then when that wrapped up, I was like, this is it now. I'm quitting flute. And I had the big cry about it. And I was like, this is it. I'm going to work in corporate. And then Jason was like, well, I'm getting my real estate license. So have you ever thought about that? And I was like, well, no, but maybe I could use Biogen to float our real estate, a potential real estate venture together or whatever. So I was considering that in the back of my mind, but I wanted to see how it was going for him. And then out of the blue, Judy Grant calls me from Boston Flute Academy and says, I've heard that you're a great teacher, and I have some students at the Boston Flute Academy that I think would be a great match for you. In particular, one of them, Nick Fitton, who was in between years. He had left Eastman School of Music and partway through his degree, and he was looking to reconnect with some of his flute and piccolo skills and audition at some other institutions. And Judy asked me to teach him. And the funny thing is, I told her, I was like, Judy, I just quit the flute, right? And she was like, well, I didn't know that. Wow, that's terrible. But I'll tell you what, I'll give you 2 weeks. You can decide. Let me know in 2 weeks. So all this stuff kind of I'd left Haynes. I was working back in corporate, doing a relatively, what I thought was a relatively simple, straightforward job for me that was not stressful. And it really gave me the space. Letting go of the flute gave me the space to really consider these new opportunities.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I also took this other opportunity so I took Judy up on teaching, and Nick became a student of mine, and we worked intensely for a year together. And he ended up getting into Peabody and studying with Marina, and he finished his degree there. And in fact, he's back at Peabody now, doing piccolo degree with Erica Peel. And, it kept me in touch with the flute, but in a very joyful way.
Okay.
And then basically I decided to get my real estate license. And this is where flutistry comes from.
Okay.
So I was in these classes. I think it was over like 3-week period for anyone out there that's ever done your real estate license. I was terrified because I was like, I have to study. It's been years since I've had to study and remember anything. My goodness.
Yeah. Right.
And I was just panicking about it. But I think the second or third week of classes, there was the class about buyer's agency and seller's agency in real estate. And I was just sitting in the back of the class thinking, oh, well, that's actually kind of why I was not upset, but unhappy working at a flute maker, because I felt very much in that instance that I was the seller's agent.
Yep.
And I wasn't really the buyer's agent. And so in that moment, I thought, I am going to follow through with this. And in fact, I did. I got my real estate license, certified real estate license in Boston. And I never used it because that idea would not let me sleep at night. That what we have in the flute industry is we have just a history. There's been so many, and that's an important point to make here. There's been so many innovations, especially in the last 30 years in flute making, right? We can name them all, from scales to materials to mechanism styles, pinless and pinned and pad types and head joint cuts, and you name it. Lots of different makers now. So the industry was evolving at this incredibly rapid pace. But the buyer's representation, right, the buyer's access to information was coming primarily from makers who wanted you to buy their flutes, right, their products, and many different makers, way more than putting your name on a wait list for a Powell in this, whatever years, the 60s and 70s, and how, waiting, however many years to get that flute. And guess what? It comes with the head joint that's on it. You don't get to try the head joints, right? Like, the industry has changed so much since then. And when I was looking around, I realized the makers all have a tradition of making flutes, and in fact have kind of stepped into this role as salespeople, right? Now there's more competition, and they have to try to sell more of their flutes so they can survive. Flutes are very expensive, but the margins are not great on flutes. So these are not wealthy companies, right? I mean, they're successful companies, and if they're well run, they're around a long time. But there's a lot of money involved with flute making, but the people involved don't always get to keep that money, right? So it's always invested in the instruments. And so what I realized was, while there was all of this going on, that there wasn't someone standing in the middle that was a player, had experience making, had experience repairing, knew a lot of people in the industry, and how, and not just at the making level, but at the marketing level, at the artist level, and had all these different experiences to kind of say, what, that players deserve a better understanding of their choices, right? So not that the understanding they were being given were bad necessarily, but they were a little bit out of touch.
Okay.
Right. And so, someone that's worked at any of the makers their entire career really only knows how that maker sells flutes and how that maker makes flutes, right? They can be aware of what the other brands are doing and all of that, but they're not working with those instruments every day like we might be, right? So, I was starting to see that, and I realized, Haynes moved out of downtown Boston. So now here you have the world's flute city. Yeah. And no place to try flutes. And, people that think of Boston as the flute center of the world, it is. Yeah. But once you get to Boston, then you have to drive anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half outside of town just to get to one flute maker. So I thought it was strange looking around that, 100 plus flute majors in the city of Boston, all of the major conservatories, right? Berkeley, Boston Conservatory, New England Conservatory, Boston University, Longy School of Music, BU, like you name whatever the school is, like they're all not buying flutes from the flute makers or from anywhere in Boston, because they are all busy in classes and rehearsals during the day, during the week, and the makers are closed at night and on the weekends. So students would order out flutes from around the country, or they would take trips to other cities to try instruments. And I just thought, this is strange. This is very, very strange. And I think that there needs to be more representation, and not just representation of the flutes in downtown Boston, but mostly representation for the players, for the artists, for the buyers to understand all of their many, many, many choices. Because think about it, their teachers, most of these students' teachers come from a generation of flutists that were on those wait lists, or their teacher had a standing order with a maker, right? So much has changed since then. And it really, I looked around and I said, you know what, with my business experience and my playing experience, my repair experience, my making experience, and the clear need in this community for a very high level of understanding of the flute and the industry for this community, that it was worth giving it a shot. And so I was planning on leaving Biogen, and then there was this scuttlebutt that there might be layoffs, and there were. And my department was one of them. And honestly, I was thrilled, because I was like, oh my goodness, I get a very small severance package. And for the first time in my life, I can have like a month or two where I don't have to work in order to pay the rent. And I can not work, but not work and have a paycheck. And so that's when Jason looked at me and said, I think you should try building this business. And so I started, and I took some of that money and I built a wall in our apartment. I mean, we had like a 500 square foot apartment, and I put up a wall in the middle of the living room and created like an 8x8 room where I would repair flutes. And I had a little Fiat, the tiny little Fiats. That was my car at that time. And I started doing sales work, not as a dealer, as a fully authorized dealer, because in my mind, and I think in the makers' minds too, why would they want a dealer selling flutes just, 20 minutes, half hour, an hour and a half from them?
Right.
But the more I talked with them and the more I brought clients out to them as a consultant, they started to see, oh, he is selling flutes for us. So we started, very like beta type of, trial situations where we would just say, let's try this, let's see how it goes. And so there was one weekend during that period of time where I was, after I had been laid off from Biogen, where I piled 3 flutists into my little Fiat and me. To fit 4 people in that car was a miracle. It was like a clown car. Yeah. It was me, and it was Ridge Davis, who went on to study from NEC at Colburn. He just played the soundtrack for Ghostbusters 2, which is coming out soon. And Erica Boyson, who's an amazing flutist and a great artist. And she's, of course, the professor at UNCG and a dear friend. And Kate Lemon, who was a marvelous flutist, also studying at NEC at that time with Paula Robeson, who's also very well known for her photography, probably nowadays especially known. It's really remarkable photography. Anyway, Ridge Davis and Erica Boyson and Kate Lemon and I spent 2 days in my little Fiat driving around to all the flute makers, and each one of them bought a different flute that weekend. And that was the start of, okay, now there's something to work with here. And I wasn't getting commission, quote unquote, or anything. It was more like a finder's fee, very, very modest arrangement in the beginning. But then that's when there was a clear need that there was sales opportunity, and that makers started to be very interested in that. So basically, I was growing the repair in my apartment. I was growing the sales in my apartment. And eventually more and more people were coming into the apartment that were strangers than people that I knew. And that was starting to get a little bit weird. And I needed to kind of change that arrangement. And at the same time, the dollars were getting more and more and more to keep track of, more tax obligations, more paperwork, more administrative stuff. So I just want to introduce this thing, what Erica's going to say about this, because the whole time I'm doing this, I have my head down and I'm just trying to do this. And Jason, my partner at the time, was just telling me, he's like, anything you need, I can help you, whatever. And just, if you need quiet, shut the door, all this is fine. Like, it's fine to have strangers in, like whatever we need to do to keep this business growing for you and what you're doing. And he would also say, every once in a while, he'd say, I have this friend from Metro Detroit, where he grew up, that I really think you should meet. Her name is Erica. And I was like, okay, that's great. Thinking, what does this violist know about flute people I should meet, in my rushness of like trying to juggle all these moving parts that I was so overwhelmed by. Mm. And he kept saying, we got to see Erica. We got to see Erica. So one night I've decided I can't put it off any longer. I have to sit down at the computer and I have to I have to learn QuickBooks. Mm. I have to learn QuickBooks because I cannot let this business go on after a couple of years without getting all this stuff out of an Excel spreadsheet and into an official accounting software. Mm. Now I'm pretty good. I could do Photoshop and Illustrator and Excel and all sorts of web software and yada, yada, yada. But wow, I was sitting down at QuickBooks and it was making me really just sweat. I was completely nervous about what to do. So Jason walks by the door one night and says, hey, I'm going down to the restaurant across the street, Woody's, to meet up with Erica. And I was like, okay. He said, do you want to come? And I was like, no, I got to work on this QuickBooks thing. And so I was sitting up there in the apartment. Well, he's downstairs having fun, having dinner with a friend. And I'm like literally on the verge of tears. And now this is when Erica, of course, is Erica.
Yeah. So Jason and I grew up together, like kindergarten all the way through high school. And we knew each other forever, really. I think we used to play house in my basement. But he brought me in and said, you have to meet my fiance, Adam. He's starting this flute business. And I come into the apartment and Adam is sitting like in the fetal position on the couch and starts telling me that he cannot figure out QuickBooks. And I say, I do QuickBooks every day at my day job. And of course, I had no idea that there is a huge difference between setting up an entire business and managing the finances of it than just entering the data that I was entering as an assistant at a company. But I thought that I knew. I was pretty sure that I knew.
And even better, I was pretty sure that she knew. Because I looked at her and I literally was like, I literally, when I heard two people come into the apartment and I was so out of sorts, I was beside myself. And I heard two people come into the apartment and I was like, oh my goodness, he didn't bring his friend here who like is about to see me like a total disaster. Right. And of course, Erica being Erica, that's not how it went. But after she says, I do QuickBooks all day at my, at my day job, I literally was like, oh my goodness, do you want a job? Yeah. And can I give you a hug? And that's immediately what happened. And from there, we have grown and evolved and been a team, and the team has grown exponentially since those early days.
Yeah. So I think, we hugged it out, and then maybe 2 days later, I had a job where I was working nights until I don't even know when. It used to be like midnight before I would go home after my other job. And then I would be there all weekend. And I was able to do that for about 4 months before I couldn't take it anymore. Got myself a dog so that I had to go home early. And it took really, it was that year. I think that would have been 2013, I think, when things really started moving from repair in the apartment and a little bit of sales here and there to the business starting to grow into Flutistry the way that people know it now. I mean, it's 10 years in, it has been a long road, but somehow also very short. It's still a long way to go. But yeah, so then I think 2014, Adam, we finally ended up actually getting a place, an actual real place that wasn't your apartment.
Oh, what a relief that was. Yeah. It was time. It was really time.
To have space and to spread out and do your thing in a actual business environment. I bet that was a relief.
We had so much space. So much space. We had no idea how we were ever going to use all of the space.
We even thought about renting out, like subletting it to a friend that was doing another business, so that we could we were like, what are we going to do with all this space? And of course, what we ended up doing was, creating that wonderful concert space that we have, the event space that we have, which has been a huge part of our, really, that was a big moment for us to have that. It felt like, every day showing up at work felt like an arrival. You're arriving at this, really wonderful, welcoming, special place. It's unlike any other place I've ever been. It's really like one of the first concert event spaces just for flutists really in the world, or at least of its kind when we started it. And it's where we get to test flutes. It's where we get to work with customers, but also where we get to have incredible events, which were all happening, of course, before the pandemic. But so, yeah. And I think Flutistry really started to take, once we got that space, Erica, wouldn't you say that like, it wasn't just the background of our structuring, the kind of architecture, the skeleton of the business was really coming together in a very clear way, but we started to put some meat on its bones a little bit, right? In terms of like what the business felt like.
And from day one, Adam and I have always very collegially argued about what the most important things were. When Adam started this business and thought of the name, it was Flute plus artistry. That was supposed to be the most important thing, was the artistry of it. And part of what has worked so well in this partnership all the way through is that we have been able to find the way to say, yes, we need to sell instruments and help people find their voice, but also we're going to do these incredible artistic events that are fulfilling and wonderful and support our community. And we're going to, give scholarships to kids who need it. And we're going to find ways through this that really speak to who we are as the buyer's agents and with sort of our guiding principle of that flute plus artistry approach to it.
Yeah. And it's also something that makes, I think, Flutistry really unique is, we're the first dealer, quote unquote, as we think of flute dealers of our kind in Boston, Massachusetts, where all the makers are. So, a lot of people might see our name and they think whatever people, I don't know what people think Flutistry is or does. I hope they know some of the things that we do, especially, the flutes that we carry and stuff like that. But, being in Boston, it's a really unique experience to, on a weekly basis in non-pandemic times, have any number of flute makers just show up to drop off instruments or to look at a new prototype or to, do some repair work in the back shop, or we are driving out to the flute makers to work on one of their instruments with their, with the person that made it. Like there's an incredible synchronicity between what we're doing in our shop with all the makers, and not just the ones in Boston, but especially the ones in Boston, because we pretty much have instruments, of quality from all over the world. And that is something I think that really makes Flutistry a unique place. To open a flute shop in the vicinity of some of the most educated, highly skilled flute makers in the world and be respected doing that is something that we're really proud of, and also keeps us on our toes, keeps us paying attention to the products and to, our quality of, understanding. And I think where the name flute and artistry comes from is, of course, we as flutists think of artistry of, our own artistry, our inspirations, our mentors, the way that we inspire and mentor other people later in our lives, but also the artistry of the flute making. And to kind of translate the industry speak and the heavy-handed marketing nature of brand agendas, if you will, right? With really translating that information for the artist's understanding of, okay, I hear what you're saying, X brand, about your flute, but I really need to know how this flute is going to work for me. Enter Flutistry. That's really what we do. So there's these three kind of areas that we like to focus on. And of course, it's people, people, people. All of this talking that I've done, my apologies to everyone. But all of this talking, and it's because we're really passionate about the people the community that we serve, the people that are on our team, right? That some of our team members have been the only contact with certain clients and artists and what have you. And everyone has their own experience. Those people that work with Flutistry have had their own experiences, but our team members are incredible. And they're all flutists, whether you're full-time or part-time contractor. We work with so many wonderful people, from Carolyn McCrone, who's our sales and customer service manager, Kyle Martin, who's our senior repair associate in Boston right now. Of course, there's Erica and myself that work with a lot of folks trying flutes. And then we have, a whole team of people that we engage with, including Nicole Ricardo from Nicole, NR Media, who I know you've interviewed several times, and her entire team that has helped us and continues to help us. And, people like Debbie Parker, who in a time of non-pandemic helps us with our trade shows. So, someone calls up and says, do you want to exhibit at our festival? They talk with Debbie and she coordinates all that, make sure we know what we need to know. Katie Wary, who of course is such a marvelous flutist and a marvelous spirit and a great person, who was also a full-time employee at Flutistry for almost a couple of years, I think, and then moved back to Colorado. She's still working with us kind of part-time. And, of course, she's the founder of Etude of the Week. So there's so many things that we get exposed to that were inspired by her work. And, Jonathan Bernhardt, who was a very important part of our team for many years, started, Erica, 2014 probably, too?
Oh, gosh, I don't even remember.
Yeah, I think he basically graduated from Temple and was interested in the industry, hadn't done much with flute repair. And, he started at Flutistry. He came up to visit, showed him some repair stuff, saw how he was at the bench, understood a little bit who he was from a technical perspective and his interest and curiosity in solving problems. And he worked with us, was an amazing part of our team for, almost 6 years. And then his dream job opened at Powell to be I think his official title is quality finishing.
I have no idea. Head of quality
control at Powell Flutes. So, to work with such incredible team members over the years and all work towards a common goal of supporting our artists, our community at whatever level artists people are, people are the number one thing, the driving force behind our business. And that includes makers and colleagues and clients and artists and all of it. And you'll see, as Erica was saying, we work with everybody, right? All those different levels. And then the other kind of thing that we prioritize are our products, obviously. And Erica, I don't know how many times you get this question, but one of the most popular questions that I get, whether it's on a Zoom conference or the many trips I've taken around the country, people always want to ask me what's my favorite flute is or what the best flute is. And, they always want my opinion on that. And my opinion and our opinion at Flutistry is very clear. We believe in the products that we sell. And that's as far as that opinion goes. If we don't believe in it, we don't think it's good for someone, we don't sell it.
Got it.
And that's basically, or, there are the rare situation like a Keith Piccolos doesn't really have dealers, right? He's got to wait. So, there's situations like that. But basically, like, the question really isn't, what's your favorite flute? The question there, because what they want to think after that is, well, then I want that flute, maybe, but the real question should be, what's the best flute for me? And that's the conversation that we have all the time at Flutistry, not because we give the answers to the customer, but because we help them discover which instrument is the best for them. And that's kind of the last element of what we focus on. So people and products is super important, what we do. But the other thing that really makes Flutistry unique, and all three of these things build up to our flute and artistry perspective, is process, right? I literally started Flutistry because I thought the buying process should be different than it was for the benefit of the person buying the flute. Right. So I grew up on, with really limited means and had many, many, many difficult times financially growing up. And the couple times in my life that I had the opportunity to buy a flute, I was not in a financial position to say, oh, shucks, a year later, I bought the wrong flute. I should have got XYZ, right? That was just not going to happen. Yeah. And a lot of us are in that position. Certainly there are people that are not in that position, but, we really take seriously encouraging our customers, our clients, our artists, our players, our buyers, however you want to call it, to answer for themselves the question of, why are you looking for a flute? What are your goals? How do you want your audience to hear you? And once you answer those questions, and then you try these instruments, you'll know which flute is for you. Yeah. But if you just, and we'll give some guidance along the way. Like, if you're really hemming and hawing because your teacher plays this brand and it's just not working for you, we might step in and say, we've tried every combination in your price point. of that brand. And it's okay to say, this brand concept of sound and feel is not really matching with your artistic goals and the reasons that you're looking for an instrument, right? And say, we're not saying no to it right now, but let's focus on the things that are left right now, and let's see. And usually you find people, we find that people end up being, really, really pleased with their instrument, because we really think of the relationship between, because of my making experience and my repair experience and my playing experience, and helping all the makers in Boston. I mean, we've been a part of almost every, flute maker's product in one way or another. There's different things that we've contributed to. Our understanding of those instruments really is just information to help the customer understand, why do I like this flute? Or quite frankly, why don't I like this flute, right? And that is valuable information for the buyer to have, because I think one of the things Erica and I were talking about is that as trained as great flutists are in all their excerpts and their scales and all of those things, or we hope to be, we have very little practice in trying flutes. We have a lot of practice playing the flute that we play. We might have a lot of fun playing our friends' instruments, trying them out for fun, or trying our teachers' instruments. But when it's really time to put your artistic goals on the line, right, we don't have a lot of practice. And that is exactly what makes Flutistry a unique company. That's what we're focused on the entire time, is bringing information without bias to the player for their benefit, so that they make the choice that's really best for them, and understanding that not only am I going to secure this particular instrument today that I hope to grow into, and that will help me achieve and accomplish my artistic goals, if it's to be principal flute of a major orchestra in the future, or if it's to play duets with your best friend on the weekends in your living room, right? Whatever your goals are, we want to make sure that you feel and sound great doing it. So if our product or service that we're offering does not contribute to you understanding how you can sound your best, we don't offer it. We don't sell it. And if you look at what we have, from sheet music to accessories to all that stuff, like, that is the deciding factor of what comes into our inventory, whether it's instruments or other products, is really about helping our clients sound their best, and not only sound their best, but understand why. And that's actually the part that we believe, and Erica, jump in at any time, is really, after 10 years, and we're celebrating this 10th anniversary this year, which is really, I think this show with you is such a great opportunity to kind of kick that off for us. I think what we're coming to realize is our relationship with our instruments are evolving all the time. And as our artistry is evolving, as our goals are evolving. And so, of course, someone doesn't buy a $20,000 flute from us with they don't want to hear us say, guess what, you might be buying another flute in 5 years. But the reality is, if they keep playing and keep studying and keep growing and evolving, they might actually, or be looking at another head joint or what have you. So when it comes to kind of what distinguishes Flutistry, it's this multi-tiered kind of perspective about our purpose being to bring the industry, to innovate and to evolve the connection between the industry and the artist. Erica, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you're getting it.
Good. Finally, after all these years, you'd think. Yay, me. I'm going to call my mama. She's going to be so proud.
No, I love it. And I will interject here, just from, recalling my student years and picking out a flute. And what you brought up, Adam and Erica, was very interesting about how I'm almost hearing you guys say that you find yourself to be in this role of like a mediator, perhaps like the go-between, perhaps, of the student to the teacher, or, et cetera. And I say that, and I'm reflecting on what you said, because like as a student, purchasing the flutes I have purchased, it's really interesting to see that I purchased flutes based on my teacher's preferences in the past. So as an undergrad, I bought said brand from said teacher because he or she was that performing artist of said company, right? My master's, same thing. I purchased a flute based on my teacher's likes and dislikes. both flutes did not work for me. They were not the right fit for me. They were beautiful instruments and I did okay, but they weren't my fit. And it wasn't until my DMA that I'm a late bloomer here, slow learner, but I finally realized, oh, this is what I'm looking for. And then that's when I actually did my own research and found out what I liked, what I didn't like, and then I purchased, said flute. So I'm not saying specific brands because I don't want to, that's not the point in this. The point is I love how you brought that full circle for me. And I had that aha moment. And I'm sure a lot of students and semi-professionals and maybe even professionals who knows, but a lot of flutists may hear this and think, oh my gosh, yeah, that makes sense. I'm connecting the dots.
Yeah. And I think I'm excited to hear you say that because it's one of the things, it's very hard because, when we show up at a show, like an exhibit or a flute festival, we're one of many exhibitors with booths and all those things. So, it's hard to kind of get this message across, and clearly, it's still hard because we're talking all this time to get to some of these things. But I believe that after 10 years of seeing how things have evolved, and I know Erica is on board with this too, that, so many of the innovations that have happened in flute making have happened, especially over the last 30 years, and some incredibly brilliant flute makers and innovators that have made some remarkable changes to the instruments that we all benefit from. But sometimes it's not those features, it's the combination of the features, or it's the combination of the materials, or the combination of the head joint cut, or it's the combinations, it's the recipes that actually create sometimes an affinity for one match and a dislike for another match. And we think that the players should know more about that. And I think if you're interested in spending money and time to go to a masterclass, I think you should also want to know about the instrument that you're holding and playing into, that the audience is listening to. I think that it's time for this flute community to be curious and educated about the details of not just the instrument. Is it playing, for example? Like, does it need a repair or whatever? Not just that. We're talking beyond that. We're talking about, is this instrument holding me back in some way, and why? Right? Because I think the innovations in flute making, I hope I'm wrong, but I do think that the innovations in flute making are kind of slowing down, right? How many more materials can we come up with? How many more head joint styles can we come up with? How many more things can we do? And now we're at the point where we're adding stuff outside of the flute itself to make it different. And I think the innovations that are next in the flute community are going to come from an educated player population. And so if we want to see changes in the flutes, I think the only thing that we're going to be able to do is to see those from not just great players, but curious and educated players about the actual instrument itself and their understanding of their relationship with that flute, that serial number, that head joint. Right. And that's kind of part of our method. We do all sorts of workshops where we talk about those interconnections. But I think it's important because, as Erica said earlier, and Heidi, maybe you feel this way, I'm curious, turning the tables and asking you, since you went through it, I don't see necessarily that people regret having made multiple choices, but they do see hindsight is 100%, right?
Yeah.
Hindsight's 20/20 or whatever they say. So you do start to see that. And so, I'm a believer that people get to where they're supposed to be eventually, right? So there's like that kind of faith, as Erica was saying, but it sure would be nice, especially in a time of pandemic, where we're so concerned about our health and our community and our careers and all of those things and each other's well-being, that we're not concerned when it's time to purchase a flute that I might be making a mistake or I might be having to redo this again, because it's not just the money, right? It's the time spent looking for the instrument. So if you're taking 6 months of your undergraduate degree at a $20,000 a year institution to try flutes, right? And instead, if we time everything right, and we have this whole ready, set, go process that's awesome for like the most streamlined you can possibly make your search, not to rush you, but to make sure that people know, all the boxes they have to check along the way, right? And that every box they check makes them feel more comfortable about making their decision, and feeling confident in that decision. And so, that's what we spend a lot of time talking about, because really, there are great flutes everywhere,
Yeah.
right? But we don't make great matches. We help you make a great match for yourself, right? And that's really what we focus on. And it's just, understood that the instruments that we carry and the way we take care of them are, tip top in terms of our understanding of quality and what we want to put out there and expose our clients to. So I do think it's interesting. So how do you feel about that, with you having, realizing like, oh, like that was what my teacher's preferences were, not necessarily that they had an agenda for you, but that's just where their ear was and their mind was. How would you describe that for you when you finally found the flute the combination that's best for you?
Yeah, great question. I think like at the time, looking back over these, maybe 10, 15 years and seeing those different circumstances unfold, I don't think it was bad for the time, only because I was young and I didn't have that knowledge or that voice yet. And so I think as students, sometimes we imitate and sometimes we kind of are a chameleon to our teachers, right? Because we don't have our own footing just yet. So I think
even what Erica was saying
yeah,
earlier. Yeah.
And to a certain extent, it was actually good, probably, just to have that guidance and to kind of say, okay, I'm going to copy right now. And then at a certain point when I did find my footing and I was starting to have my own voice and I was more of a air quote expert, then as a DMA student, then I could make that decision for myself. So that's how I feel.
Yep.
Yeah. I think we see, we get to work with really fantastic artists at every level, whether they're, kids really getting excited about it or, great high schoolers or, conservatory students and professionals that have won a job and are now trying to figure out what to do now that the conductor already decided they thought they knew what their sound was. We get to work with people all the time. And at every level of it, I think no matter where you are in your development, trying instruments is really hard. There's a lot of emotion behind it. It's the thing we spend the most time with every day of our lives. It's sort of an extension of who we are. And it's also a thing that is constantly evolving and changing our playing and our artistry and our vision of what we want. And then, once every 5 or 10 or 20 years, we are left in a room with a bunch of flutes that we know nothing about and told to figure out what we want. And I think it can be, we have seen so many people that come to us after the meltdown already happened, after the many, many, many months of, trips here and there and the boxes and the trying and the lessons with the teachers that could have been spent on other things and, and lost. We see people all the time that come in lost. And so we like to really go back to the beginning, right? As Adam was saying earlier, and say, okay, what are we actually trying to accomplish? Because knowing what those goals are helps us figure out what we actually want. And that becomes, sort of our North Star as we navigate through it, which is to say, this flute is wonderful, but not mine.
Yeah.
Or this flute feels great right now, but what is the potential of it a year from now or 2 years from now or 5 years from now? And, I think for us in this business, it's been this journey over the last 10 years that we continue to evolve and continue to grow and learn ourselves in this of how do we help people make the best decision that can be made and help them do it in a way that feels good and feels right, but feels artistically fulfilling and actually helps you grow through it. I've seen so many people that come in to go through the process. And by the end of the process, they're playing a little differently and they're thinking a little differently. And even just the experience of trying the flutes, of trying different brands where you have to physically do something different than what you do on your own flute every day. Even that itself, I think is a really fascinating growth process. And I love being able to help people through that.
It's Erica, you saying that makes me think of kind of one of the things that we figured out how to explain to people. They're like, oh, so are you telling me like what flute I should get? No, that's not it at all. Actually, what it is we understand the products, right? So for example, One head joint of a certain brand flute might have a really steep lip plate, right? A really sharp bend to the lip plate on that blowing edge, right? So the lip plate is really close to the head joint tube, which means less resistance, right? And if it's short versus long, the drag is less too, right? So that would be considered something that probably feels pretty free blowing, right? Now, there are other things that you can't see as easily that would also dictate how the instrument feels when you play it. But, and then the next flute that you pick up from another brand might have a head joint on it where the head joint lip plate in that spot is a bit more broad, much more of a broad angle where it's much more rounded as opposed to a sharp angle. And so if you play that head joint or that other flute that you pick up the same way you just played the first one that with the steeper, sharper angle, you're not going to get results that you like. Because if you blow down into that second flute the way you did the first one, your air is going to bounce off of that lip plate that's much longer and much higher in front of your face. And it's going to feel resistant and stuffy. And you're going to say, I don't like this. Now, if we just said to you, well, you might not like it, but what if you just lifted your chin but still blow down, right? Let's then see what happens. That's the type of stuff that we're talking about, because that's something that someone that's not pointed out to might not understand. And so they might say no to a combination that just needed a very small change to get the results, the winning results that they want, right? And so we're not saying, and this is the kind of the discovery of my life this last year, is that we're not saying this is how you play the flute. We're saying this is how you play that flute.
I see.
Right? So if you come up to the table, if we're at an art show and you come up to the table and you bring with you your box of 120 crayons with the crayon sharpener in it from Crayola, which I love. You know, we all want that. We all want lots of colors. And that's one of the things that most people talk about when they say that they're looking for a new instrument, right? At certain levels. I want more colors. I want cleaner articulation. I want to project more. I want a bigger sound. I want to blend. Like, those are the types of things at a certain level that you hear on repeat, right? From virtually everyone that's looking for an instrument. Which tells me it's not necessarily the instrument, it's probably the match that you're currently playing that's limiting you. And so, you know, you've evolved past it, whether it's materially or you just don't line up with that brand concept and setup anymore. So someone comes to the table and says, you know, I want this technique with the colors, and I have the colors, but it's not doing the technique that I want. And so I'm not getting the color combination that I want with these crayons when I try to blend them. And so I say, oh, well, here, why don't you try this? And I hand you a paintbrush, a watercolor paintbrush, right? And then I say, why don't you try this and see how that works for you? And then you pick up the paintbrush, has the color on it that you want, but then you press it on the page and you hold the paintbrush the same way you hold your crayon. You're not going to like the results that you see. And you're going to say, I don't like that.
Yeah.
But if I say to you, well, that's because it's the paintbrush. Why don't you just tilt it a little bit to the side and don't press as hard on the page? You might then go, oh my gosh, that's the color that I love. And it's not that hard to do. I can see myself using this as a flexible tool. That's what we're talking about. Is we're not saying this is how you play the flute. We're saying when you explore these and you have that discovery, when Erica was saying, you know, we find that people are playing a little bit differently. They are, because we're encouraging them when we can. Of course, people just come in and try flutes and buy them, and that's wonderful. But then there are other people that are on that journey where they're trying to understand it. And so, you know, we try to help them, because the main goal is we don't want them to say no to something that could be that flute that they're looking for, right? So we want to give them every opportunity and advantage. And that doesn't happen everywhere. You know, great respect for our colleagues and everyone in the industry, but that does not happen everywhere. And it's a priority of, I think, not just our unique collection of minds and professionals at Flutistry, but also it's a generational thing. It's a combination of the experience that we have as far as understanding the equipment now that's out and how it's working for our audience. I'm so sorry, my puppy is doing this, so I need to get him a little treat.
No, you're fine.
So anyway, I wanted to just jam on that because that's such an important point. I think people are afraid to experiment sometimes, or maybe they're being judged while they're trying flutes by anyone that's listening. And like Erica said, it's just one of the most intimidating things, can be, or difficult things, hard decisions to make. I mean, we try to bring all of our expertise and passion to the forefront to help you in that process.
I love that. Thank you so much for painting that picture. And I love, speaking of painting pictures, I loved that parallel and that connection you made between the paintbrush and the watercolors and the amount of force or not force. I think that was brilliant.
Well, hopefully it helps our audience, your audience, understand through this medium what we're talking about.
No, that's wonderful. And since you hinted at it earlier, you mentioned your 10-year anniversary, so huge congratulations. And since you are celebrating that this year, is there another event or another, whatever that you're looking forward to in 2021?
Yes. I mean, there's so much. First off, I mean, we're definitely super grateful. I think that's the first thing. We're just so grateful that we're still working. I think not everyone has that. It's a privilege. We understand, times are very difficult for small businesses. There's no question about it. Everyone in the industry has been impacted at every level. But we also recognize that we're still in a position of privilege in that we're still working and we're still incredibly grateful. So thank you to our support, our clients, our artists, our teachers, our friends, everyone who's been, and for those that don't work with Flutistry, thank you for supporting your business of choice, because it's an especially important time to do that. We want to be here to help you for as long as we can, and we have to be able to keep our doors open to do that. So, 2020 was a difficult year. 2021 is proving to be an interesting year so far, but are moving forward with celebrating our 10th anniversary. And I think, one of the things that we're especially looking forward to, of course, is being together with people again in the future, in whatever the new normal ends up looking like. But also, I want to recognize that, if there is a silver lining of this terrible, terrible time, and it's hard to even say that, but I guess what I'm saying is, I think this is actually probably going to be proved to be, a very creatively fruitful time for artists and for the industry. And I think I think we were probably all headed there in some way or another as the industry's been evolving, and that's the classical music industry and also the flute industry. But it's definitely happening now in a bit more of a prompted type of way because everything that's been going on. So having said that, we have the big announcement really for us is that we're announcing our 10 years. And really, when we think about our story, our 10 years, despite all the talking that's happened during this interview, is that the whole reason that we exist is for our customers, for our clients, for our community. And so when we tell our story outside of this unique opportunity and this unique platform that you've provided here with Flute 360, we really want to celebrate our community. And so our story really is, if you want to know, forget all these background things that we've shared about how we started, who really cares about that in the end? Everyone that we work with has a reason that they're working with us. Right? They need an instrument, they need a repair, they need advice on what piece of music to play at, a wedding or a funeral or whatever way that flute fits into someone's life. And those are the moments that we live for. And so, we are launching a campaign, a kind of year-long project called #FlutistStory. So we'll be putting that information out on our social media within the next couple of weeks. Basically, there's a certain type of question or questions that we're going to be asking every month. And we want anyone out there that's interested in answering those questions or doing the challenge that we're putting up, whether it's a picture or a video, to answer that question. And I think our first one is going to be, how did you start the flute? Why do you play the flute? Right? And so we're going to be asking that question, and we're going to be asking people to #FlutistStory. And we're going to learn about so many flutists and their stories throughout the year, which is truly the best way that we can celebrate our 10th year. And that's what we're doing. So we are not just thinking about the past 10 years, but looking forward to the next 10 years and getting back in touch with our community and understanding why everyone's playing the flute and why the flute's important, and to hear each other's stories. So that's really exciting. We're working on that. And that's going to be every month. So stay tuned to our social media for that. And there are going to be other announcements we're going to be making. We're planning on one fairly major announcement, at least for us, every month on things that are going to be out there to serve our community. So for example, we're going to be launching the Trial Studio, the Flutistry Trial Studio. That is an incredible online tool that we have built from scratch. That is also a trial kit of a really high-end microphone, the Shure MV88 Plus, an iPod, Beats headphones, and an online platform that we've built for you to be able to try instruments online with us, record yourself, share your recordings on your different options, using that upgraded equipment with anyone in the world that you want to hear you play, and for them to be able to rate the combinations that they're hearing and submit those scorecards right online. All of it comes to you with feedback and a report so you understand like what, and you can log in and see everyone's feedback, and just to help you make decision, not only during the pandemic when we can't be in person, but also, I think a lot of people are going to be using these online tools for a long time. So the Trial Studio is going to change the way people try flutes, and that is coming out in the next month or so. So that's happening. We're really looking forward to that. We're also working on getting our teacher co-op program out there so that our teachers understand the different ways that we can work together and that we can further support their students. I think our teachers and flutistry have something in common, and that is that we want flutists to sound their best. Everyone wins if you sound good, right? Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure that we do our part as much as we can to help our teachers have their students having access to some of this information we've been talking about that's appropriate for them and their instrument search and their level of playing and understanding. And another thing we're working on that's not quite in the early stages, but has some more logistics to go through before it's formalized, but we're establishing a foundation that is designed specifically to make the instruments, and this is a huge announcement, the instruments themselves more accessible, which means available and affordable, playable, so that they're in great shape, and compatible for flutists of all backgrounds, primarily from the Black and Latinx communities, so that we can kind of step in as not flutistry itself, but the organization can help bring flutists from lots of different backgrounds to help contribute to diversity, especially in our community. There's a lot of programs out there that are, and they're growing, and we're getting more and more programs out there that are supporting this community. But there is a little bit of a gap around the instruments themselves. And that's something that we're really focused on. And we've had conversations with many of the major makers. And when we get post-pandemic and people can organize themselves, logistically and financially after everything, we're going to be doing a lot more with that. So that's an extremely exciting program that's going to be coming out this year. And there's a host of other things that we're looking forward to, all for our community. And we look forward to hearing from everyone, how they're using those things, and hopefully they'll be of some help and contribute to their experience as well.
What amazing projects that are unfolding for you. That's wonderful.
Thank you. We've been working really hard, right, Erica?
Yes.
No wonder you guys work 7 days a week. Oy vey.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But seriously, very creative ideas, and I can't wait to see those projects being presented into our community. That's amazing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. We have talked about everything under the sun between, how you started the business and all of those wonderful opportunities for both of you, for both Adam and Erica, right? And laying that foundation out even before Flutistry was Flutistry, and then hearing your guys' amazing stories unfold, and now, yes, reflecting on these 10 years, but then pressing into, the next 10 years, right? And I loved hearing almost this beautiful spider web, right? I just literally, I've said this before, but I really do get goosebumps when I hear of my guests and their stories, because there are so many nuggets in there that I completely resonate with. And I know the listeners will too. So thank you for sharing that story.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank
you. Yeah. So I do a fun little segment at the end of the show, and it's called Picks. This can be music related or not. It could be your favorite book, food, whatever. So Erica, do you have a pick for the listeners today?
Oh gosh. I mean, it is never ending. I finally, in the new year, finished the book that has been on my nightstand for years, The Feather Thief, which is really not about flute at all, but it is a nonfiction book about a flutist who stole birds from the Natural History Museum outside of London and tried to sell them in order to buy a gold flute.
Huh.
It's an actual true story. It's a very well-written book. I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it. So that's particularly fun, but on a more flute-related note, it's really not about flute, that book, but it's great. I just really hope that everybody this year will do a lot of listening. I know our lives happen so much online now that we're all listening more than we used to, I think, sometimes. But, I hope you'll record yourself and hear yourself. And I hope that you'll find lots of inspiration and artistry out there to enjoy and to help us get through the year.
I love that. I will have to check out that book. Thank you for that recommendation.
It's great. I got it. I haven't, to get me to read is a difficult thing, but
yeah. It's going to sit on your nightstand now for a while too.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
And for you, Adam?
Oh gosh, I think this is so fun. I just have to say, from the last couple of days, I think the Bernie memes are pretty classic. I'm loving seeing Bernie in all situations, literally situations, but also Amanda Gorman's poem and poetry reading at the inauguration was spectacular. And if people have not seen that, they should. It's very inspiring. And along those lines, this is a kind of an interesting thing. One of the things that we've challenged ourselves to do in this last couple of years, and especially recently, is to really recognize where we have privilege. And certainly for me, being a white male of my age, I recognize that I have a lot of, my life is different because of the way I look and the opportunities that are afforded to me. And so, for other white brothers and sisters out there, if you haven't had the chance to read the book White Fragility, I think it should be required reading. And I think that when we all come back to what things we have control over and can influence in our industry, if we actually want to see it be a different place, we do actually have to educate ourselves and in fact, act differently. And so I highly encourage folks to read that. It's really mind-blowing in a lot of ways. And then on a flute-related note, I'll just say, for everyone out there, Survival of the Flutist. I know, Heidi, you had Marianne Gadigian on speaking about this book. It's something that we actually published with her. And I think it's a really special story that is so many of our stories at one point in our lives or another. And I think it's especially poignant and important right now, because quite literally, when the book came out, we weren't looking to survive physically, emotionally, financially, all of that. And that all is happening now. And when we get back to playing the flute more full time, we want to remember why we're doing it. And I think that's really great. So, Heidi, we will be letting you know, we're going to do a coupon code. We're planning to do a coupon code for you for Survival of the Flutist at our website. So we'll arrange that and we can help get that out to your listeners. Oh
my goodness, how generous.
Yeah, we're excited. We want more people to know the story. It's a meaningful story.
Wow. We're grateful to be part. Oh my goodness, you guys have already been so generous, and then for you to go above and beyond, that just means the world to me.
Well, it's our pleasure. We're so grateful that you had us. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my goodness. I'm so glad that you brought up Marianne Gadigian's interview, Adam. And I just quick pulled it up, and my memory did serve me right. It is episode 50. So for anybody, so if anybody, it's a good number, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And, so if anybody is interested in hearing that talk with her, she goes through the book so beautifully. She talks about her collaboration with the artist, and it was a really neat talk. So check that out.
It's great. When I heard it, it was great to hear some of that background.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
And congratulations to you, Heidi. You've done a lot of incredible work.
Oh, thank you.
This is quite a body of work that you've contributed to. So we're really grateful to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you. That means the world to me. And I will say that literally this project could not be where it is today without all of these wonderful guests like you and Erica. I really, honestly, genuinely mean that, because at the end of February, we will have produced 150 episodes.
Wow.
And yeah.
It's a lot.
And that's a tribe. It's not, and sometimes I do these series where it's a solo series for the month where I purge my own ideas and my own knowledge, because that's the season I'm in and I need to get, those thoughts off of my chest and into the air. But there are tons of series too that highlight everyone in our community, not just professionals, but students, amateurs, composers, flute repair people, and, hence this 360, outlook.
Yeah.
But thank you. I appreciate that. But it literally has taken, and it is taking, a whole tribe to bring 360 to life. So I'm very grateful for everyone's contributions.
Well, we look forward to lots more episodes too.
Yes, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Erica and Adam, for your time, talents, and energy. And again, thank you for your financial support, your emotional support. And I cannot wait for everyone to hear this wonderful episode.
Oh, thank you so much, Heidi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. Please subscribe to the Flute 360 newsletter by going to HeidiKBegay.com. A pop-up will appear and you can enter in your information for the weekly newsletter. The newsletter includes great incentives, updates, and perks to the subscribers. Go ahead to HeidiKBegay.com and sign up today. Thank you. Let's talk about flute.